It seems that there could hardly be a more universal religious symbol than that of light. Light appears in one form or another in all of the great religious traditions of the world. And what's more, light is, or seems to be, a non-controversial, non-sectarian symbol. Light is entirely content-free, you might say, which makes it a truly generic symbol, which makes it ideal for use by Unitarian Universalists. Most of our congregations begin their worship services, as we do, with the ritual lighting of a flame in a chalice. Unitarian Universalists honor the light as a symbol of clarity and rationality. We trace our intellectual heritage in large part through that revolutionary movement in European history known as the Enlightenment. A good example of this heritage is the Unitarian Universalist Church in Hanska, Minnesota, founded by progressive Norwegian immigrants, former Lutherans and freethinkers who identified strongly with the Enlightenment values professed by the American Unitarian Association, with whom they voted to affiliate in 1881. And to this day, their church newsletter is called Mer Lys, which in Norwegian means more light. At one level, that may simply be a protest against the long Minnesota winter nights, but I think it's rather an affirmation of the traditional Unitarian Universalist values of enlightened religion, a religion which is continually subject to scrutiny and open to the critical light of reason. And that's a good thing. I belong to this tradition, and I affirm it wholeheartedly. But I sometimes wonder if we might not also benefit from a bit of what the psychologist Sam Keen has called endarkenment. Endarkenment is the realization, the liberating realization, that life has its dark side and that this darkness is inherent to the human condition. It's not something alien that needs to be eliminated or banished or repressed or somehow overcome. This darkness is a quality of experience which needs to be accepted and integrated and ultimately embraced. When taken to its extreme, an overemphasis on enlightened rationality can lead to behavior like that of the Hoja Nasruddin, the sacred fool of Turkish Islamic tradition, who was supposedly found one night on his hands and knees searching under a street lamp. And his friends came up to him and asked, what are you looking for, Hoja? The keys to my house, Nasruddin replied. Wanting to help, they inquired further, where exactly did you lose them? I lost them in that dark alley over there. Well, they asked, why don't you look over there then? Nasruddin looked up at them with genuine surprise and replied, because there's more light here. But what if the keys, more light, Mer Lys, what if the keys that we have lost, the keys that would allow us to truly enter into and inhabit this world as our home, what if those keys are hidden precisely in the dark places and the dark times of our lives? In her book, The Fruitful Darkness, A Journey Through Buddhist Practice and Tribal Wisdom, the American spiritual teacher Joan Halifax quotes an elder of the Ute Nation from the American Southwest who told her that the secret of life is in the shadows and not in the open sun. To see anything at all, you must look deeply into the shadow of a living thing. Sam Keen would agree that at the individual level, endarkenment involves coming to terms with that unconscious but powerful part of our own soul that depth psychologists call the shadow. As the great psychoanalyst Carl Jung put it, psychological growth and maturity come not from imagining figures of light, but from making the darkness visible. And in her book, Dreaming the Dark, the neo-pagan writer Starhawk sums up what the shadow represents for many of us. It is, she says, everything in us that we are afraid of, all that we don't want to see about ourselves. The fear, the anger, the grief, the death, the sex, the unknown. She would agree that coming to terms with that shadow within us is an essential part of psychological growth. If we fail to do that inner work for ourselves, we inevitably project our own unconscious shadow onto others with results that are disastrous. Shadow work is at the psychological level, involves the responsible integration of one's own inner darkness. And at the theological level, endarkenment suggests that divinity also has its shadow side, that ultimate reality is not only awesome, but also awful. Mystics of all times and cultures have recognized the shadow side of God. The 16th century Spanish contemplative John of the Cross, for example, spoke of the need to pass through what he called the dark night of the soul in order to arrive at and rest within the full vision of divinity. But that can be a terrible and frightening passage, and we are often afraid to undertake that journey precisely because we project onto the screen of the infinite our own psychological darkness that we know dimly in our souls. So to enter into those shadowy times and places is an adventure which requires courage and faith and trust, a condition described by the poet Wendell Berry, writing of a nocturnal walk in the forest. He says, "To go in the dark with a light is to know the light. To know the dark, go dark. Go without sight and find that the dark too blooms and sings and is traveled by dark feet and dark wings." Now, some brave souls choose to make this journey intentionally. Some are compelled by crisis to confront their own shadows. Others just wake up and find themselves, like the poet Dante, in the middle of the journey of life in a dark wood where the path was lost. Now, whatever the reason, our religious tradition can and should provide symbolic and ritual resources that can help us navigate, that can help us in this necessary task of making our way in the dark. Now, positive images of darkness are not entirely absent from the Western religious tradition, but you really have to look for them. And like Nasruddin, you can't simply search where the light is brightest. In his book, The Dark Center, the Filipino-American theologian Eulelio Baltazar explores the symbolism of darkness and light as they appear in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. He points out that the many positive valuations of what the prophet Isaiah called the treasures of darkness in the biblical tradition, voices that recognize and assert that darkness and light are not at war, but ultimately reconciled with one another. Both night and day, for example, are created and called good by God. The psalmist addresses God saying, "Even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you." Balthazar also notes examples of negative valuation of whiteness, as when Miriam's skin was turned white as snow in divine punishment because she had become angry with her brother for marrying the Cushite woman. So the symbolism of darkness and light in the Bible is complex and rich and ambiguous, and it is only an enlightened European reading that has narrowed and flattened that metaphorical richness into a simple, stereotypical understanding that separates light and white from black and dark, regarding the former as good and the latter as evil. Beyond the duality or the dualism of light and darkness, from a God's eye view, so to speak, light and dark are one. They're distinguished but not divided. They're ultimately harmonized and reconciled to one another. Now, of course, we don't see things from a God's eye view. We mortals do not have that privileged perspective. We must make our way as best we can through the alternating rhythms of our lives, night and day, darkness and light. We must learn a new kind of depth perception. We need to learn to see in the dark again. It's been said that in the time of Galileo, the light of the Milky Way was so bright that it cast a shadow. Now, 2/3 of the population of the United States can't even see the Milky Way at night due to light pollution. Those figures are from the International Dark Sky Association, an organization whose mission is to protect the night skies for future and for present and future generations. We had a member of our congregation in Duluth, a wonderful woman named Robbie Lapp, who moved to Duluth from Oregon to be near her daughter, who lived out in the woods in a place where it was a night sky sanctuary, you might say, beautiful, clear visibility. And she wasn't with us long before she died. I must say, beautifully. She really, it was an example of someone who made that passage very intentionally. And part of what she did was to lie out in the field on her daughter's farm and just look up at the night sky. That was her way. So, by the way, that's called darksky.org, if you're interested. It's a very interesting organization. So I did my undergraduate work at Bowdoin College, a small liberal arts school in Brunswick, Maine. Bowdoin's alumni include the Arctic explorers Robert Peary and Donald McMillan. There's even a little museum on campus which is dedicated to their expeditions. Peary's reputation suffered somewhat a few years ago when it was determined by the National Geographic Society that he had fudged his figures and probably never really arrived at the North Pole, although he claimed that he had. His African-American companion, Matthew Henson, may have made it, but not Peary himself. At any rate, because of this Arctic connection, the Bowdoin College mascot is the polar bear. I think we have a couple of images of a statue taken just outside my freshman dormitory. The next one as well. I didn't take these pictures, although I have taken some right next to the chapel. So the Bowdoin polar bear is the mascot, and the official school color is white. Just white. So imagine that. Can you picture that? At some point, it was decided that the athletic teams needed a contrasting color so that the fans could make out the numerals on our uniforms. So now the uniforms are white and black. They're actually pretty sharp. I like them. But the official school color is still just white. My point is that in order for visibility to happen, both darkness and light are needed. But in our intellectual brilliance, in our enlightened age, we sometimes lose sight of that elemental truth. And in the West, we have historically elevated the light and the white to a position of presumed ascendance and superiority over the dark and the black. It's no accident that against this whited out horizon, Matt Henson's contribution simply wasn't seen. He was literally invisible. So it turns out that light is not so non-controversial after all. When 40 years ago our hymn book commission was gathering materials for the Gray hymn book, they took very seriously the issue of inclusive language, not only with respect to gender and theology, but also with respect to race. And they pointed out how often in our religious language and hymnody, darkness has been used stereotypically and usually unconsciously as a symbol of evil. So there are some positive images of darkness included in this hymnal, including the meditation one song we sang earlier. The most powerful images and symbols, of course, are those which emerge from personal experience. And I want to briefly share two experiences of my own that brought home to me the power and positive depth of darkness and the necessary relationship, the cosmic dance between darkness and light, experiences of what Joan Halifax calls the fruitful darkness. One of my favorite state parks in Minnesota is the underground mine in Sudan near Lake Vermilion. I think we have a picture of the head frame. I don't know, how many of you have visited this park? A few. Richie, I see a few. The first shipment of iron ore, left this mine on a train bound for Two Harbors, Minnesota, my hometown, in July of 1884. My Finnish-born great-grandfather worked in this mine when he first arrived in northern Minnesota. And it operated until 1962, when the property was donated to the state of Minnesota, and it became a state park in 1963. So to visitors to this park, put on a hard hat and take a ride in a cramped elevator, kind of a little, not entirely vertical, a little bit of a slant, down to the 27th level, over half a mile below the surface, where the temperature is a constant 55 degrees throughout the year. And then you take a trolley ride to a place where mannequins are set up. I think that we have a slide of this showing how mining was done at various stages. It's all very fascinating. But the high point of the trip or the tour, or perhaps I should call it the low point, is when the guide turns out the lights and we're plunged into darkness. We really should turn all these lights off, but you get it. Words fail me when I try to describe what I can only call the absolute character of that darkness, the complete and total darkness. Impenetrable isn't quite the right word. If anything, this all-enveloping darkness seemed to be perfectly penetrable, inviting, infinitely inviting, profoundly peaceful darkness. Of course, I knew that before long the lights would go back on and we would soon be whisked to the surface, where we would stumble out into the sunshine, blinking and rubbing our eyes. But that felt experience of darkness was unforgettable. From the depth of that mine, I brought up my own treasures of darkness. So the second personal experience that I want to mention took place at Newgrange in Ireland as part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Has anyone else been there? Here's a picture from above. The original complex was built during the Neolithic period around 3200 BCE, making it older than Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids. The retaining wall is a modern feature, but the essence of the site is intact. And here again, the grand finale of the tour that I took involved the guide turning off the lights and then turning on the lights that simulate the rays of the sun as they would appear on the winter solstice. And this next slide gives you a sense of what that looks like. The angles were calculated very precisely to penetrate this chamber at the time of the solstice. Now, I was there in late June, not long after the summer solstice, in fact. If you want to experience the winter solstice from inside at Newgrange, you have to enter a lottery. And of the tens of thousands of people who do that, 60 are chosen each year. A winner is allowed to bring a single guest, and the group is split into cohorts of 10 people and taken in on the 5 days around the solstice in December when the sunlight enters the chamber, weather permitting, of course. The Irish Druidic bards were trained in complete darkness. They memorized their repertoire of stories and songs while secluded in windowless stone cells. I had a slide of that too. I forgot to bring it, but include it. But they learned in darkness, memorized in that kind of environment. How different that is from our modern forms of education, which seem to aim at achieving what Episcopal priest and writer Barbara Brown Taylor calls full solar spirituality. The ideal is kind of a pure transparency without shadow. My favorite modern Irish bard is the poet-philosopher John O'Donoghue, who might as well have been emerging from one of those cells or from the tomb passage of Newgrange when he wrote, "We are always on a journey from darkness into light. Every thought you have is a flint moment, a spark of light from your inner darkness. The miracle of thought is its presence in the night side of your soul. The brilliance of thought is born of darkness," he says. Each day is a journey. We come out of the night into the day. All creativity, he says, awakens at this primal threshold where light and darkness test and bless each other. You only discover the balance in your life when you learn to trust the flow of this ancient rhythm. And here we stand at the primal threshold of the solstice, where we are called to feel and to trust the flow of this ancient cosmic rhythm. The last image I want to share is a picture of the Tai Chi, the symbol of what is called the great ultimate in the Taoist tradition of China. And here we see darkness and light integrated to such an extent that each side contains a small portion of its polar twin. It contains that within itself, the yin and the yang. Now, yin and yang mean literally the shady side of the mountain and the sunny side of the mountain. Ideally, and that's of course not a static image, you have to imagine this diagram moving in a dynamic way, just as shadow and light play across the landscape of a mountainside. Here's a quote from the Tao Te Ching, the ancient Chinese scripture. The word Tao, by the way, means basically the patterned intelligence of the cosmos. When the Bible is translated into Chinese, invariably the word in the beginning was the word. That important word in logos, Greek word logos in Christian scripture is translated as the Tao. So it's this sense of this deep patterned intelligibility and intelligence of the universe. So here's what the Tao Te Ching says. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of 10,000 things. Ever desireless, one can see the mystery. Ever desiring, one can see the manifestations. These two spring from the same source, but differ in name. This appears as darkness, darkness within darkness, the gate to all mystery. This Taoist darkness is an example of what Greta Crosby called pregnant negativity. Darkness is not simply the absence of light, but a fertile and generative power in its own right. In the Taoist tradition, yin and yang are evenly balanced, though darkness seems to enjoy a certain priority or precedence, which is true in Western religious tradition as well. If you think about it, darkness was already there upon the face of the deep, well before the Creator declared, "Let there be light." As the late great British fantasy writer Terry Pratchett put it, light thinks it travels faster than anything, but it is wrong. No matter how fast light travels, it finds that darkness has always got there first and is waiting for it. Darkness is the mysterious primordial ground from which all particular manifestations of reality emerge. So how do we feel about this? Not what do we think, but how do we feel about all of this? Rebecca Solnit writes that most people are afraid of the dark. Literally, when it comes to children, while many adults fear above all the darkness that is the unknown, the unseeable, the obscure. And yet, she says, the night in which distinctions and definitions cannot be readily made is the same night in which love is made, in which things merge, change, become enchanted, aroused, impregnated, possessed, released, renewed. This darkness is fruitful indeed. The light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it, wrote John the Evangelist in a true theological assertion that is often heard at this time of year. But it must be said that neither does the light destroy or eliminate or entirely banish the darkness. The light shines precisely in the darkness. They dance together. And solstice is a time when we attend to and honor the rhythms of this dance and the treasures of darkness, both within and beyond ourselves. We honor the darkness, which is a cradle to the light, but which is also a benevolent power in its own right. And beyond both darkness and light, we recognize an even deeper source of illumination, what some mystical theologians call the uncreated light of God. By thy light we see light, wrote the psalmist, addressing the divine ministry. By thy light we see light. But even as we acknowledge this sacred vision, we also recognize that it is only against the background of immense mystery, out of the deep and dazzling darkness, that we are enabled to see both light and shadow in our lives, and to have faith in the night as well as the day, and to make our way gracefully in this world. My colleague, the Reverend Kathleen McTeague, expresses this quite beautifully in the benediction with which I close. May the light around us guide our footsteps and hold us fast to the best and most righteous that we seek. May the darkness around us nurture our dreams and give us rest so that we may give ourselves to the work of the world. Let us seek to remember the wholeness of our lives, the weaving together of light and shadow in this great and astonishing dance in which we move. Amen.